everyone, it's Emily with Neighborly Equine Services. I'm going to be doing a video for you today. I've had a few people ask me how I do some of my basic groundwork things with my horses. This is Sakara. He's a 6-year-old off-the-track thoroughbred. He's been with me for about 6 months. He is here to learn just some basic dressage, so moving off the leg, things like that. And when he first came, he didn't know any of that. So we had to work on the ground to establish moving away from pressure before he knew what it meant when my leg was on, because legs are pressure. So if you teach it from the ground to move away from pressure, like away from your hand or away from the whip, then they can more easily grasp the concept under saddle. Today, we are going to be working on or learning 3 of the groundwork exercises that I do really frequently with him to help him understand how to move his body away from pressure. So the first one we will look at is a turn on the hindquarters, or what I call a turn away, where the front end is moving around the hindquarters. Then the next one we will look at is a turn on the forehand, where the hindquarters turn around the forehand, turn around front. Front stays mostly stationary, although ideally you want a 4-beat, like a walk, 4-beat while they're turning. And then we are going to do some groundwork for beginnings of leg yield. So that is the moving away from pressure. This kind of work is really great also for establishing boundaries. So if you have a horse that likes to run all over you, or you're walking them to the pasture and they kind of do this sort of deal where they move into and they're like, oh, we want to just hug you, and that can be kind of dangerous in the long term if a horse spooks and runs and you're in their way, or if they don't know to stay out of your space. So this is also a bunch of really good exercises to help the horse to know to move out of your space if you need them to move. So without further ado, we will demonstrate those for you. So the first thing we're going to do is a turn away, or a turn on the haunches, or turn on the hindquarters, however you want to say it. The tools that I use when I'm teaching this, I have a dressage whip, and I have also, some horses need it, some horses don't. I'm using it, this horse doesn't generally need it, but I am using it for the sake of teaching in this video. I also use a chain, and the way the chain is wrapped is just underneath his chin. For extreme cases, you could put it through the mouth, but that would just be for very extreme cases. And then it's just attached at the bottom to my lead rope. Another thing to note is gloves. I always wear gloves when I'm working with horses because rope burn is not a joke. It's a safety measure that's very easy to use. Even in the summertime, it can get a little hot, but I would rather have gloves than rope burn or blisters. So I always wear gloves because safety. So the first thing that we are going to do, come up here please. I have kind of, you can't really see it anymore because he stepped in it. I drew kind of an X in the sand right here. And I am going to try my best to keep his hindquarters on or near the X. And the way this works is you're going to stand roughly about here. And you're going to, sometimes you need to push away at their face as well to help them to understand. But ideally, you want to be able to press on them right where their neck, right where their neck meets their shoulder, to just have them turn away. And you want their foreleg to step behind and across. So this guy gets a little confused when I'm here. When I press here, he's not sure what to do. He kind of comes forward. So I say, no, we don't want to go forward. So when you're teaching your horse to do this, come on, The idea is that you're doing a sideways step, and then a back, and then a sideways and a back in the front. Okay. So here he's crossing in front, which means he's running through forward. I want him to go back and sideways, like that. So I kind of, whoa. Now, on an overly stubborn horse, when that happens, you can jerk the chain like this. Now that is not a hard jerk and it's not hurting him. Obviously you can see it did not bother him, but that is the reason for your chain. It is to kind of be able to get their attention if you need it. So I want him, nope, to move sideways and back. Good. Now he's moving back a little more than I would like because he's still learning how to do this exercise. So ideally, here we go. There he's doing it. So you want to take it, especially when you're first starting out, one step at a time. Good. And you want to micromanage every single little teeny weeny movement of your horse while you're doing it. Good job. Good boy. So if you let your horse make a big move, he's likely to go, oh, okay, and then he's walking and not doing what you want him to do anymore. This is a really good exercise if you need to teach your horse to move away from you, to get out of your space. Whoa. Whoa. Good. And it's also a good exercise for teaching them to pick up their front end and move it over. All right, so next we're going to work on a turn on the forehand. Now, a turn on the forehand, as I said before, is moving the haunches away from, well, there he's even going to do it for you. Moving the haunches while keeping the forehand, ideally, in one spot. Now, as you saw with our turn away, or our turn on the haunches, this guy is still a little bit new to that concept, so he did not stay on my X. But the idea is, once you have them moving away from the pressure correctly, then you can concentrate more and more on, okay, no, we are micromanaging to stay on the X. So while we were making this video, he wasn't cooperating very well, so I went from stay on the X to why don't we just move our feet in the correct direction? And then later on in another training session, we'll go back to the X. So always baby steps. So, come here, buddy. I'm going to move him up here so we can see. So when you're on your horse, I have my surf single on here to kind of help us visualize where our girth will be. When you're on a horse and you're doing a turn on the forehand, your leg is going to be back here, because back here asks, easy leg, I'm not asking yet, is where you will ask the horse to move his haunches. When you're on the horse just moving sideways, you will have your leg up by the girth. Okay, so this is just for the sake of the video, for visual, as to if you have a saddle on your horse. So when you're doing asking and teaching a turn on the forehand, you will have your hand here, and you will just put some pressure and ask your horse to move. Now he shifted, good boy. He shifted when I first put my hand on, but he didn't quite move, so I just used one finger to put a little more pressure. And when you are doing this, if you need to, this is where your whip can come in handy. You can have your whip here, and you can use your whip to tap. Oh, buddy. He says, yes, ma'am, I will move. So you can use your whip to tap, or you can just have it there as a presence to enforce your aids. So this guy, as we can see, is really getting good at a turn on the forehand. So again, now if you watch the back legs, you want this leg to cross in front of this leg. This way. Okay. Now, I'm going to ask him again to move over. And whoa. Now he is an overachiever, so a lot of times he moves way more than I want him to, even when I ask him just for one step. So ideally, he needs to just like that. He needs to move his haunches sideways and step, but I don't want him to just walk forward out of it. I just want him to move his haunches to the side. So if you're teaching a turn on the forehand and you're having trouble getting them to turn, what you can do is take a step back and just kind of use your whip and tap. Little buddy, good. Good boy. And that is another way to kind of get their attention, get them to move that. If you have to use your whip, you want to start with a very light pressure, so just a touch. And then if it doesn't work, you just up the pressure from there. All right, so our last thing that we are going to talk about today is moving away from pressure. This is the first step in teaching a horse to do a leg yield or a side pass. So a leg yield is when you're on the horse and you put your leg onto the horse and the horse moves off of your leg sideways while at the same time moving forward. So it makes the horse kind of walk diagonally. So the way that we begin to teach that is we begin on the ground and come on up here. We begin on the ground, and what we want to do is we want to make sure that our horse understands that the pressure is going to be here. Whoa. And he's feeling a little bit antsy right now because we've been asking so many things of him. We're working his brain quite a bit today. So you want to make sure that you've got your hand, stand still, buddy. Your hand right at the girth where your leg would be. And then we're going to ask him to move forward and then sideways at the same time. So it's really difficult sometimes to get horses to understand because usually when we lead them, we're here. So now we're going to be more in a position that you would be in for lunging. So he already kind of goes away from the pressure. So first we're going to walk forward, and then I'm just going to ask him to move sideways. Good boy. And what I'm doing here is I'm asking him to move sideways as well as coming forward. Now, you saw me probably noticed that I used my whip. So he wasn't quite moving his hind legs, or his hind end as far sideways as I wanted him to do. He was leading a little too much with his forehand. So I was asking him just to pick up that leg on the inside here and move it, good boy, move it just a little bit more actively. Now, what I was doing at his head, which this is where the chain comes in handy. Because it gives you a little more leverage, especially with a horse that is maybe running away from the pressure or getting a little bit freaked out by the pressure. This chain gives you just enough leverage, almost like a bit. I really like to do this exercise in a bridle as well, so that you have your reins. I'll cover that in another video. But what I'm doing with his head is I'm kind of wrapping it just slightly around and bending it to the side to kind of help him move off of that shoulder. And I was also checking his speed going forward. So I was telling him, no, don't run away and don't run through me. Move sideways and forward. So now we will show you a view of that from the front so you can see how he moves, how his legs cross. Okay. All right, so now we will get to see that same exercise, but you're going to see it from the front. And now you should be watching the front legs, which unfortunately don't have a white polo wrap, so they may be a little harder to see, but the front legs should cross like this, as should the back legs. And they should always cross in front because obviously we're moving forward. If we were moving backward, we're crossing behind. So I'm going to ask him to go forward. Look forward. And you always want to establish that we're going forward. So here he's really kind of wanting to do it before I'm asking. So I'm just going to back him up and we're going to try it again. Now he is so in tune to me that I don't even have to put my hand on. He's just going sideways. So if your horse begins to anticipate the yielding from pressure and the moving away from pressure, just go to something different. So if you're walking forward and he begins to yield to a pressure that isn't there, just ignore it and do something else. Keep walking forward and don't come back to that exercise until he stops anticipating the exercise. So you could go and do something like a turn on the haunches or turn on the forehand, walking over poles, or put him on a lunge line and just make him go forward. Any of those things is a really good way to get his mind off of the exercise and then come back to it later so that he doesn't think that anytime he walks forward, he has to walk sideways as well. So those are my 3 most common ground exercises that I do on horses for teaching them leg yields, teaching them a turn on the haunches, teaching them a turn on the forehand, and also teaching them some boundaries, because if they can move away from pressure, then they can understand personal boundaries, and you can teach them not to jump into your space if they're afraid or if they're just want an extra cuddle. Another note, before we end this video, you need to teach these exercises on both sides of your horse. So if your horse is good on the left side, where you're pushing away towards the right, that doesn't mean that he knows it pushing towards the left, going the opposite direction. Many horses work well because they're used to a human walking on their left side. But horses' brains don't do that. Horses' brains don't multitask. You have to teach both sides of the horse, or the horse will not know it. So if you teach them on the left side, but don't teach them on the right side, then they won't know it on the right side at all.